Welcome to the Homeschool Oklahoma podcast. I'm Jonathan Bartlett, and today on our podcast, we are really excited to be talking to Leigh Bortins, the founder of Classical Conversations. For those who don't know, Classical Conversations is a homeschooling community that has communities across the nation. While it's based in North Carolina, Oklahoma actually has a huge number of homeschooling families that participate in their program, which covers kindergarten and high school. Leigh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's been a long time since I've seen you, and we've had some really interesting interactions in the past. So whenever I got invited, I was just excited that it was you. Are you the president of the group? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so I'm president of Homeschool Oklahoma. It's kind of we have a whole board that that covers Homeschool Oklahoma, and so we kind of rotate the president around every few years. But yeah, this last year and a half, I've been running it, and I've been focused on just trying to get the next generation of homeschoolers to understand the depth of what it is that we're doing as homeschoolers.
Yeah, it's just not school at home.
Right.
It's a whole lifestyle.
Because what we found out is that, when we started homeschooling,
in the old days,
yes, no one ever started out homeschooling just like, today I'm going to go homeschool my kids, right? That was never, if you were going to do it, everyone was going to look at you funny. And so you knew you had to do your research, and you had to, it was a decision that may have taken years of thought and prayer, and you only did it if you were absolutely sure. But now, what's great is it's very easy to homeschool.
Right.
And I love that. But the problem that we've run into is that we have a lot of new families that just they haven't been fully onboarded into the homeschooling mindset yet. And so that's why I'm really excited that you have a new book out that is covering a lot of this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, it's called The Habits. It's about cultivating a grammatical education among your children. It's aimed definitely more towards younger children, just because that's where people think about grammar studies, and I can define that in a minute. But really, if you're beginning to learn anything, no matter how old you are, how experienced you are, you always start with the grammar. So even though the tips and tricks for at home are aimed towards that under 12, under 14 group, I have a good friend in the military who's a commander of an entire base, and he makes his soldiers go through our books because of the grammatical approach required to know all the language of the military. So same thing. So the habits, and it's all ages, and it's called The Habits because during the 30-some years, or 42 years I've been homeschooling, 30-some with Classical Conversations, we've recognized that every person on this earth has a rhythm to them, right? And that's why there's a liturgy to church. And we see that liturgy in creation. So we know God through his creation. And so if God every day could get up and say the sun's going to shine and the moons are going to come out and the daffodils are going to bloom at this time and the animals are going to mate and have babies at this time, surely there's something in that for everything else that we do. And so we have found that folks who educate their children the best, have the best discipline within their families, without mitigating fun, are those that have good habits. And you hear that all the time when it comes to manners or food or eating. And our argument is, no, those habits carry over to everything that you do. So as an easy example, you might have a math book in front of your 5-6-year-old or a work page for math in front of them. And that's great if they can do the math. But what I, as a mother, am trying to inculcate in them is that there are times during the day where you sit down and you learn where to place your hand, and you learn how to hold a pencil, and you learn how to guide your eyes across the page so that you can read well. Those are habits. You have to practice them like a basketball player has to practice dribbling. And so the whole book is just tips and tricks on how to deal with folks when they're trying to learn something new. What are the physical habits as well as the academic and the spiritual habits that'll just make it easier for you.
Yeah, that's such a great topic, because habits are what make you able to do something without having to think about them. And so once something becomes a habit, it's no longer work to include it in your day. It's just naturally what happens.
Okay.
When something's not a habit, then you have to you're disrupting someone's whole day to do something. And so once you establish a habit, then it's that's just the natural part.
That's absolutely true. That's why we want our children to have the habit of eating breakfast and making their bed and making sure the household's just not chaotic.
Yeah.
Right. No. The other thing is the word habits comes from meaning putting on clothing, and you think of a nun wearing a habit.
Right.
That those habits reveal your character. They reveal your mission in life, your role in life. You go to, if you're around somebody whose habit is respectful to say please and thank you and pull out your chair, you know something about that person that's different than the person who doesn't do those things.
Yeah, and those things form over long periods of time. And that's the things that, and that's one thing that I get excited about homeschooling is that we get to not only teach, but we get to form. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand the difference between those two things. And they think that teaching is all about the amount of information that goes from point A to point B. Yeah. But it's really about how do we make a human who's who follows the good, follows God, and follows and does what is right. And habits are kind of the baseline for that.
I mean, think about when the habit was for a 12-year-old girl to sit under a tree and just read her summer away. What kind of culture did that form versus a 12-year-old girl who's, playing video games? And I'm picking on a girl now because it used to be it was a boy thing. The young girls are doing it,
right?
Too. So the whole culture gets changed by what kind of habits you are practicing. And then we as Christians, there's a lot of things that we want to do regularly to honor the Lord. And so why would that, like I opened up with, not carry over to what we're doing with our children? Because what I don't want people to think is that everything is on a timeline with exceptional rigor and our children are treated like soldiers.
Right.
On the other hand, guess what? They actually are soldiers, just not yet. They're children.
Right.
But so we're trying to give them enough of that structure so that as adults, they know when they have to stay within structures and when they can leave the structure. And because, our number one thing, and there's a lot of this in habits, is playing. Playing is the most important habit for your children to practice. So,
why don't you talk more about how play is a habit?
So, the screens have just really changed that. One thing that's kind of ironic is there's a lot of screen time, a lot of reels of fathers posting their sons and their daughters playing outside. It's like people don't know how to play anymore, right? So you probably can remember, I can remember, our mom shutting the door on us and saying, come back when the street lights come on. Well, that's how I raised my children. What I didn't realize is that wasn't how everybody else was raising our children. And so they as ambassadors of Christ need to know there's nothing to be afraid of in this entire world, and they own it. That everywhere they step, they're bringing heaven with them, and they need to not be foolish. They can be children, that's okay, and but they need to be confident. And so when you don't let a child just go out and play, and you're just constantly supervising them, it diminishes their capacity to have self-control and to be confident. So play is the best way for them to figure out what's going on. People would be kind of surprised to know that just a couple different things. Like all of my boys, I have 4 of them, came to me at different times around 9, 10, 11 years old, without exception, and said, Mom, do you love us? And each time after Robert, I said, why are you asking me? He goes, because you let us do things nobody else will let their kids do. And so with each of the other boys asking me, I knew that's what they were saying, because we were raising them with the habit, and I'll explain this a little bit better, to travel. So for instance, I would bike to the store with them over and over and over again, so that when they were 7, 8, or 9, they could bike without me. Yeah. We built in that habit. My husband had the good fortune of working for an airline. So for 10 years, we traveled all around the United States, and my boys learned how to deal with TSA and all the things that go with airlines. And so Robert was old enough, when he was 15, he would just say, Mom, I'm going.
Yeah.
And as long as stuff was done, we had trained him in the habit of how to see the airport, read the signs, get around on the buses. So it's totally freeing when you know what structure you're training your children for.
Right.
And so the habits are addressing that in academia as well as in playtime. Because when they were on the plane or the train or the bus traveling, they were excited and looking forward to where they're going. They didn't know we were training them. It was just a pleasurable part. Yeah, it's just what you do. So one time my John, he was really sick. I had to take him to the doctors, which we didn't do all that often. So I got there, and that was during that time period. Someone had been arrested for letting their child walk down the street to their grandma's house. And so I never think of things in fear. And so the doctor looked at me, and after I explained to him how much Tylenol John was on, and he said, "Why is he on so much Tylenol? Like, you foolish mother." And I sat back and I looked at John and I said, "You tell him why you're on so much Tylenol." And it was because he'd been stung by a beehive he knocked down, and he decided to jump off the roof and sprain his ankle. So I put him on Tylenol with each of these injuries, trying to calm him down and get him to sleep. And it was just too much in 3 days.
Yep.
So I had to take him to the doctor and take care of him. So it's not neglect, but his habit was I just go out and I explore the world.
Figure out how the world works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the confidence building for being out and being able to navigate the world on your own is very freeing for kids. I know when my one of the times that my son was very proud of himself was when he decided he was going to just meet us in Denver. He's going to take his own flight. He's going to arrange his own transportation, find the buses, and fly and meet us in Denver. And he was just being able to navigate that just gave him just a huge sense of confidence.
That the adults in the room trust him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean when they're out and about they don't do stupid things. We had some hospital visits besides John. That like, okay, why are we here? How much drugs and rock and roll were involved in this incident? They do become, young men with even more freedom. So, but they always know that the first call is to mom and dad.
Well, I think it's really. I'm glad that you brought up the fact that habits and play are not exclusive of each other. Because I think that's one thing. When people hear structure, they hear habits, and they feel like everything has to be very strictly in a line. But it sounds like what we really need from habits is just the automatic nature of something.
Yeah. So the one thing that's most unfair to children is when their lives are so chaotic they don't know what's next. They are born in many ways in spite of their sinful nature, wanting mom and dad to smile, to be pleased, to not yell. And they do that a lot better if they know what they're supposed to do, because they're little children. They have no experience in this world. They don't know how to just spin on a dime and change things. And so knowing that, food's on the table at this time, doesn't have to be every time, but it's coming. They know. That they know dad gets home, may not be every week, depending on if he's deployed or he has a stay-at-home job, but they know he's coming. The things that they know because of habit. And then that's where their trust can come from, that the adults in the room really are paying attention and taking care of them. And you can hear from anybody in any kind of school district that has just neglected children. They don't know where the next meal's coming from or who's doing the laundry. Like, these are habits that healthy, whole families work on. And they're not hard. They're natural.
I remember talking to a student once who didn't quite see the connection between habits and freedom. And they thought that having to do something was an impingement on their freedom. And what I had to explain to them is like, look, if you do what's right on your own, if you figure that out, then the things that you have to do take up a tiny amount of your day, and you get freedom for the rest of it.
Right.
But if instead you fight someone for everything that they ask you to do, and everything is a battle, then you spend your entire day in a battle, and your amount of freedom is actually tiny.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I think especially in our modern culture, we think of freedom as people not telling us what to do. But that's not really where freedom comes from. Freedom comes from doing what you should do.
Not what you can do necessarily.
Right. Yeah, doing what you should do as a habit.
Yeah. So like even the habit of, say, diagramming sentences. That's something that's been lost on modern education. So why do we value the habit of diagramming sentences a few times a week for 3 or 4 years of your childhood, and then maybe some more as you do some foreign language studies, is for just that reason. I know that if you know how to diagram the 8 parts of speech and all 7 sentence patterns, you can go learn any language in the world you want to learn because they all have those same fundamental structures. So that habit is freeing them up to live wherever they want in the globe.
I will say, as far as diagramming sentences, I actually really always appreciated my time diagramming sentences, just because I feel like when I read, I can see how the sentence lays out. And so I can read more complicated material because I can see how all the things kind of hang out. But when you develop the habit, it becomes automatic.
Yeah.
if you just kind of told someone about diagramming sentences and they never did it, or they just did it once and it was rough and they never got into the habit of it, then that's not something that's just automatic for them.
Right.
But if we do it over and over again, and we make it so that they can just see it, and it pops out to them, then that's a skill that they have forever. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory? Like, what made you start homeschooling?
Well, the Holy Spirit makes you do everything, whether you know it or not, and that's good and for the Lord. But we weren't even Christians. My husband and I were very highly academic, and we met each other at the University of Michigan getting aerospace engineering degrees. And then little Robert was conceived, and so then you start thinking about things you've never thought of before. So I was actually walking through a shopping mall with a girlfriend who was pregnant, and Phil Donahue, that great talk show host, had a family of homeschoolers on the show, and neither of us had TVs in the house on purpose. And so we stopped to watch the TVs because you're in the mall. And when we were done watching that show, very odd family, my friend said, I would never do that. And I looked at her and I said, I think I am doing that. So that's where I heard about homeschooling. And I went home and I told my husband, and I'll never forget what he said. I said, would you consider letting me homeschool the kids? And he just said, yes, because there was no way they were going to public school. You guys coming into the university at your age are so dumb. Something has happened, and I don't want my children to go through that. And because him being 9 years older, and a lot of the students at the University of Michigan in engineering were men who had gone back to school for the military programs and things. So half our classes were 18, 19-year-olds, and half of them were 28, 29 years old. And there was a huge difference.
Yeah.
It was there. So he had seen it, and so we weren't Christians, but he was like, we got to do something different. Can't do what we've been doing. So
that's cool.
That's how we started.
So how'd you get into classical education?
Yeah, it's always my husband's fault. So, like everybody else, I think even the most committed homeschooler, come 12 years old with Robert, we'd done a good job. We were happy with what was going on, but you get nervous about the high school years, and there's a lot of expectations. And being pioneers, there wasn't a lot of options of choices to kind of show you what your choices even were. So my husband and I went to a number of headmasters in private schools that were always Christian. I shouldn't say that. One was a day school, but the other two were Christian. And none of them at that point claimed to be classical, right? That's a big fad. Isn't that fun that everybody wants to do what we did? But kind of the day school standard, the International Baccalaureate standard, that's what we were looking for. And one of the headmasters, after interviewing Robert, came out to us and she said, don't send him to school. You'll ruin him. I've never met a child who's so articulate and knows what he wants to do with himself. And he was 12.
Right.
So I'd always run these co-ops and programs, and I ran Forsyth County in North Carolina homeschool group for a while. So we were leaving my husband, and this is like a God thing because he never would have said this normally. He said, you're just going to have children in the household, and we're going to have to figure out how to do it ourselves. And the reason I say that is that my husband never invites anybody into the house. He's an outdoor guy. Yeah. So we did. And so that was in 97 with 11 students from, I think, 9 or 10 different families. 2 or 3 of the moms hung out with me during the 30 weeks we met. And 3 years later, we had 300 children on the waiting list. That's get amazing. In. So we started training the moms who had been helping us to help others, and just I feel like the whole gospel, teaching them to help in Jerusalem. We weren't ready for Samaria and the rest of the world yet, but our county was willing to listen to us because those of us who led the first 5 years or so, 3 to 5 years, we'd been the ones running the co-ops and doing the scholarship programs and the college fairs, and so people knew our names. So I think that's why they joined. We had a good reputation. And then the 3 of us who really started it, our first 6 kids, so 2, 2, and 2, all got full scholarships to really impressive colleges. And that really blew it open and locally.
Well, I want to get back to what makes something classical. But before we do that, I do want to mention, so back, I want to say it was a decade ago when I was in North Carolina with you and some other people. And at the time, so we were homeschooling, and we homeschooled for quite a while. But my kids were still younger. And so I hadn't really met any homeschool graduates at that point. And so I was really excited because we got some opportunities to hang out with some kids who had graduated homeschooling at that time. And you talk about how Robert, he said he was so articulate, and that was amazing. That was my experience. I got to meet like 3 or 4 kids who just graduated, and just hung out with them and just discussed the issues of the day. And I had more fun doing that than I had just about anything else. And that just gave me a vision for what homeschooling, what it is that we're producing in homeschooling. I feel like being part of a community, being raised, as a full person, just really does something different than just being raised by the school system.
Yep.
I was very glad. I was like, okay, we definitely chose the right direction.
Yeah, and so I'll take a moment to say the scriptures say we're known by our fruit, and the best thing somebody can do is thinking about homeschooling is go hang out at a homeschool co-op one day, or come visit Classical Conversations and ask to see the challenge students, or find out is there a high school science group locally that's homeschooled. Go meet those kids when yours are 3, 4, 5 years old. It'll change your life.
And one thing, so for those who are listening who don't know, Challenge 4 is the seniors for Classical Conversations. And Challenge 4, most Challenge 4, maybe all of them, do a senior thesis. And a lot of those are open to the public. And that is just an amazing event, because you go and you have these kids who at least at our community, we actually open up questions to the audience.
Sure, you should be.
And so they actually have to answer questions from anyone who walks in off the street about what they've been researching. Now, of course, I will say the people who walk in off the street don't or even their advisors don't ask nearly as tough questions as the juniors.
Yeah.
who are trying to one up them. Yep. Those are actually the most dangerous questions, but it's really interesting to watch, and for 2 reasons. One of which, you've got oftentimes their advisors might include somebody outside of homeschooling, and they've never seen something like this before, and they are always just incredibly impressed at what happens.
Yeah.
But then also the student, there is sometimes you're raised and you're judged by your family, and you sometimes wonder, how does this fit up into the rest of the community? And so you get a little bit of outside validation that says, yes, what you're doing is really good and really valuable.
So we have those kind of capstone events through all the through all the levels of Classical Conversations, not just challenge. So even when we have our little 4-year-olds answering their presentation or ending their presentations with, "Are there any questions?" They're beginning to learn the behaviors of an academic. They're beginning to learn the behaviors, those habits of a public speaker. So it's no surprise when an adult who's not part of our community walks in, and that child has been doing it for 18 years. What did Robert calculate? It was our children speak in front of a crowd almost 500 times throughout their CC lifetime. So when they're defending a 30-page thesis on something that's dear to their heart, of course they are capable of explaining it because they've practiced so much.
Yeah.
They have the habit of public speaking. And of course, public speaking is one of the most feared things in life. And so our 5, 6-year-olds, sure, even 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, sometimes they'll go through a stage where I just don't want to do this. It's too shy. And we just say, that's fine. Just stand up and say your name and sit back down. We don't ever let them not do it. But they don't have to do it if it's painful, right? So when you got moms and dads paying attention to not just your own children, but to children you love because they're your neighbor's children, your community children, it's a lot easier to direct them and tutor them and help them through where their struggles are, and to say, you're really strong at this. I need you to develop an even better habit because you already are good at this. Let's see how much more you can do. So.
And when you get someone to just stand up, that's developing the habit. So that part, once you get that part automatic, then you get to the next part.
Yeah. So if people want to see more of that, they can come to Challenge B mock trial. I mean, we have judges around the country that are just stunned by our children's presentations when they're 13, and we hear that over and over again. Challenge 1, 2, 3 when they're going on and doing their protocols, and they're the only children in the audience. A lot of times it's all seniors, and they're in formal outfits and really well dressed. I mean, all the seniors in there want to know, where are these kids from, right?
We had a protocol event once where at the end of it, every single one of them was offered a job by the restaurant.
I need you.
Yes, literally they said, please come work for us because we need people like you.
So that's to your point. Your habits let you be free.
That's absolutely true. So let's talk a little bit more about classical education. What makes something classical?
So what's going on now in most, I'm going to pick on high school, kind of the end of children's education. There's a lot of fill in the blanks. There's a lot of matching. There's a lot of papers handed to you, the worksheets that you have to work through. That's the modern model. And of course that makes sense because as soon as we got mimeograph machines, that became the easiest way, the most efficient way for a teacher to control many children and quickly grade their papers. So that's why that's how those children are educated. But in the past, there was this thing called the Blue Book, and those were used, I mean, they're coming back in colleges now thanks to AI, where students were given blank paper and a couple of questions in 2 hours, and you just sit down and fill it out. It's an assessment of what the child knows, not how well the child can take a test. Now, taking a test is a good skill. I'm not against that. But a better assessment is for a child to just be told, here's your paper for 2 hours. Pour out what you know about this information. So that's more of a classical approach to assessment and the expectation of the outcome of rigorous study. That doesn't mean, they're still new at things, so they still may have some things like a Latin worksheet or a math worksheet because they're still working on the grammar of it. They don't have all the habits and understanding they need. But in general, a classical educator looks at the child and says, I want to know what you know, not here's what you have to know.
Gotcha.
Right.
So how do you build? How do you do an education that's more classically focused? So if I go to a classroom that's a classical classroom, what am I going to look at that's different?
So superficially, and this is what the classical schools are doing, they're going to have better content. They're going to have Latin, logic, literature, the L's I call them. They may have some more rigorous mathematical options and studies, kind of like an IB or a day school may have. But in general, what I just described isn't their goal. In other words, they may call it a grammar school, a logic school, and a rhetoric school. But if you ask the tutors to define grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and how that's a pedagogy, they're probably not going to understand how to do that. So for us, the tools of learning are that, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So the habit, the book that I've just written, is all about grammar. And what we're trying to do is get families to recognize that the beginning of understanding, the beginning of learning, the fear of knowledge of God, is through a lot of memorization and a lot of habits, right? The Bible tells us to hide God's word in his heart. So from a classical perspective, we want our children to be grammarians. And to do that, there's 5 habits we work on. We call them, just again, so they can memorize them, names. Can you name something? Can you attend to something? Can you memorize something? Can you express something? And can you share stories about it? So those are the 5 skills that we're working on in order to help Christian teachers know, and parents too, of course, this is how you get grammar into your children's head. This is how you assess that's what's happening. A lot of parents will be super excited. They went to, say, a wonderful field trip 2 days ago, and they see Grandma, and they tell the mother all about, the Oklahoma Sooners and the rush for the land here. And they look at little Johnny and say, tell Nana about our field trip. And Johnny just looks at you. Because he doesn't have the grammar, the understanding, the rhetorical skills that Mama does. He has to hear that story a lot before he can name who was there, before he even knows what to attend to, right? When you take your kids to field trips, sometimes they're all over the place. They aren't paying attention to what they should because they have nowhere for their brain to go. And then we're constantly memorizing. So like if you take a field trip in nature, Do you want to say there's a red bird there, or do you want them to be able to identify the difference between a cardinal and an indigo bunting? Can you name it? Can you attend to the colors? Did you memorize the name of it? So these are just beginning grammatical skills. You can look at a word on a diagrammed sentence on a piece of paper and say, how do you know what's the noun? How do you know what's the pronoun? How do you know what's the verb? What's the adverb? Well, you know that because you've had the habit of talking through and using those words while you are writing. So that's another skill that would go, I would call that actually expressing. Like if I can hand you a sentence that's diagrammed on a piece of paper, I've expressed that I can name and help with the structure of that sentence. And then there's storytelling, which of course is what we're doing with all of our preschoolers. You know, Daddy comes home and Mama says, go tell him what you did today. And they tell the story of their day, and they ask Dad to read them stories. So we know that that's a natural way of learning with little children. It's also the best way of learning when you're an adult. We've all, as adults, gone and learned something new, and we want to go tell somebody. Especially if we know the Lord did it for us or the gospel really got shared. It's just a natural thing to do. So becoming a grammarian who's practicing the habits of naming, attending, memorizing, expressing, and storytelling, it's not elitist, it's not hard, it's how God designed you. Every child in the world who's ever learned anything has done it that way, but the modern school system does not want those skills identified because then who would need an expert teacher?
Gotcha.
Anybody could teach.
Yeah.
Which every parent does all those things when they're saying hot, don't touch the stove, make your bed.
Right.
Is that an A, B, or C? They're doing the same things.
Right. It's a way of learning that is available to everyone.
Yep. So that's what makes it classical in almost the best sense of that word. It's the way everybody everywhere has always done everything in education until very recently.
That was part 1 of our interview with Leigh Bortins. Stay tuned and be sure you are subscribed to our podcast to hear the remaining parts of this interview as they come out.
Thank you for listening to the Homeschool Oklahoma podcast. Homeschool Oklahoma is an organization dedicated to promoting, protecting, encouraging, and equipping homeschooling families across the state. Please sign up for our newsletter at hsok.org. If you'd like to further help our cause of maintaining homeschooling freedoms in Oklahoma, we hope that you will consider joining with a paid membership as well. Thank you for listening.